In this video, I'm going to quickly review each type of problem that we talked about in today's lesson over conditional statements. So for problem 1, we have right conditional, converse, inverse, and contrapositive for the following. So the statement reads, you may watch TV when you finish your homework. We're trying to come up with our conditional statement. In order to do that, we're going to break it down into the two parts that are happening. So before we change anything, let's think about when we read this, what has to happen first? Well, reading this, in order for us to watch TV, you would have had to have finished your homework. So I'm going to call that my P. And if you remember from our lesson, our P is going to be our hypothesis. So if you finish your homework, then you get to watch TV. So that's going to be my conclusion. And we call that our Q in our symbolic form. So now that we have our P and our Q, our hypothesis and conclusion, we are able to rewrite this sentence in our if-then form that we want for our conditional. So we're going to start off with if, and we'll go to that hypothesis. So you finish your homework. Then, and I'm color coding just because I'll talk about that when we get down to our converse, inverse, and contrapositive, but it might help you visually see what's going on with them. So then we'll have our conclusion, you may watch TV. If you want to memorize the symbolic form for this, we would have our if P, then Q is going to happen. And it's written like this. When we get into our converse, converse means we're going to switch our order. So instead of it being my hypothesis and then my conclusion, we're going to switch the two and we're going to have our if Q, then P. So writing that out, we're going to start off with our if, and then we're going to pick up with the conclusion from the original, which was you may watch TV. Then, and picking up with the hypothesis of the original, we will have, then you've finished your homework. All right, so that's our converse. Moving into my inverse. So when you are taking the inverse of a statement, you are going to negate the hypothesis and the conclusion, but the order shouldn't change. It should be the hypothesis still in the front with your if, your conclusion with your then. When you negate something, you are going to make it the opposite meaning. So some things have a direct opposite, not all, and so sometimes we just insert this not this negative term in there, or if it's already there, we take it out. So looking at our inverse symbolic form, like I said, we're going to have our P and our Q in that order. So if not P, you're going to see this symbol in front showing not, then not Q. Sorry, it kind of blends. So writing out our inverse, we have our if. Looking at it, you finish your homework. Well, the opposite of you finishing your homework is to not finish your homework. So if you have not finished your homework, Then we're going to look at our original conclusion. You may watch TV is what it says, sorry. The opposite of that, again, is just us having to insert that not to get it to the opposite. So then you may not watch TV. All right, so I'm going to move down a little bit, but we're moving into the last part of this question, which is to write our contrapositive. And so once again, it's still going to be that if-then statement. But with the contrapositive, you're actually going to do a combination of both the converse and the inverse. You are going to switch the order, and you are going to negate both parts. Now, a lot of people do struggle doing both of those at the same time. And so if you've written your converse already, you can then just negate both parts. If you've written your inverse already, then just make sure you switch them. But that could be helpful, is just looking at one piece at a time instead of trying to make both changes. So writing out my symbolic form for my contrapositive, I'm going to actually look at my inverse symbolic form up here. And I'm just going to reverse that order. So I'm going to have if not Q, then not P. All right, so I'm looking at my inverse and what I had, and I just need to switch the order. So I'm going to start off with my if, and then I'm going to look at the conclusion for that statement. You may not watch TV is what I'm going to start off with. Then, and I'm going to pick up with the hypothesis that has already been negated. You have not finished your homework. All right, so that's it for number 1. Now let's look at number 2 and see what they're asking for here. So for number 2, we are going to write a biconditional for the following statements. So quick review, in order to write a biconditional, your conditional has to be true. So I'm going to write conditional is going to be true. And my converse has to be true. So I need to look at the statements that are provided, and if that is going to happen, if my conditional and my converse are true, I will combine them into one phrase that will include if and only if. So biconditional is very different than the rest. It's not an if-then statement. It's a statement that we're going to write using the if and only if phrase. So let's look at our first one. So we have, if you live in Texas, then you live in the United States. That right there is going to be a true statement. But now we need to think about our converse. So for my converse of that statement, remember you are going to switch the order. And so I'm going to have if you live in the United States, then you live in Texas. So if we think about it, if I'm living in the United States, am I always going to live in Texas? Well, no, there's going to be 49 other states I could possibly live in, and therefore this is going to be a false statement. And if one of the two statements is false, remember we cannot write a biconditional, And so I'm going to come over here and just say that there's no biconditional possible, that my converse was false. Oops, sorry. And I'm going to just highlight that because that's going to be my final answer for that. All right, now let's look at part B. So same idea. Let's just check to see if it's possible with this scenario. So if a number is odd, then it is not divisible by 2. So we want to just think of some odd numbers, and thinking of some odd numbers, I could have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. All of those are proving to not be divisible by 2, and therefore this is going to be a true statement. So when I think of my converse, once again, switching that order, if a number is not divisible by 2, then it is odd. Okay, that right there is going to be another true statement. And therefore, this problem here, we can have a biconditional written. So my biconditional, we're going to just start off with a number is odd. If and only if it is not divisible by 2. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that once again, and then I'll go over just one more time how we write that biconditional. So the key things with your biconditional is just going to be, I'm going to pick up with my hypothesis. I'm not going to have my if. When I get to the then, I am going to insert this if and only if phrase, and then I will pick up with the conclusion afterwards. Now, technically, I could also write my biconditional where I start with the conclusion of it. So we would have that a number is not divisible by 2 if and only if, replacing that then there, it is odd. So both of those statements would work as your biconditional. And that actually kind of leads us into our next problem down below, where they're kind of asking us to do exactly what I just talked about. They are going to ask you to write the 2 conditionals that are associated with the following biconditional. So remember, even though it says conditionals, you want to think about what 2 sentences do we need in order to write a biconditional. Well, we need our conditional. To be true, and we need our converse to be true. So don't get tricked when they ask for the 2 conditionals associated with it. It's just talking about writing the conditional statement and the converse of that with the biconditional that's provided. So remember, once again, we are going to start off with our if, and then we'll pick up with points are collinear. When you get into that if and only if phrase, we're going to insert our then back in. They lie on the same line. Okay, so that's going to be one of the conditionals that they're asking for. Now I'm going to write the second one by just using the converse. So we have if points lie on the same line, then they are going to be collinear. And that's all that problem is asking for. Like I said, this one's a little tricky. So just think about the criteria for a biconditional. And that way you're able to think of what two sentences would be associated with it. That is going to be the end of this lesson. Hopefully this helped clear up any questions you might have had when we were going through the notes in class.